studying together the book Orot HaTshuva, The Lights of Repentance, or The Lights of Return, which was written by Rav Kook. We will start with an introduction. Rav Kook relates to the concept of repentance not only as something that a man does when a man sins, and after he sins he repents, he regrets and repents his sin, but he relates to repentance, to tshuva, as a spiritual force which drives the world. To understand this concept of a spiritual force, we will first examine the words of a midrash. The midrash, which is brought in the Gemara in Masechet Pesachim, says as follows. Tanya, we studied, we learned. Shiva dvarim nivru kodem shnivra ha'olam. 7 things were created before the world was created. The Eluhein, and these are the things that were created before the world. Torah, u'tshuva, the Torah, tshuva, repentance, v'gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, v'gehinom, hell, the kisei kavod, the throne of glory, God's throne of glory, u'veit hamikdash, the holy temple, u'shmo shel Mashiach, and the name of the Messiah. What the Gemara is saying, first of all, this is something which is very abstract, spiritually abstract. It is not something which is physical. The creation of the world, we are not necessarily referring to the physical creation, but rather the metaphysical creation, the idea, the concept that God, as the Creator, started the world, and there are things which precede creation. There are things which are the basis of creation. There are things which are the goal of creation. And Chazal teach us there are 7 things which precede creation. They are couples. There are 3 couples and 1 standalone. The Torah and Tshuva are 1 couple. The Torah and repentance is 1 couple. Gan Eden and Gehinom is another couple. Kisei Kavod and Beit HaMikdash is another couple. And the standalone is the name of the Mashiach. Let us examine these couples. The world is based on the Torah and Tshuva. The Torah is God's commandments. God's will is revealed to man. The Torah is the ideal. The Torah guides man in how to build and shape his life, both as an individual and the Jewish people as a nation, and the principles which guide all of mankind, how to attain the ideal of the world. However, man being man, and we have our weaknesses, and man will sin. Man will make mistakes. Man will fall. The Torah teaches us that when man falls, not all is lost. Not all the ideal is destroyed. Man has the ability to take what has fallen and raise it up again. This is tshuva. So the first couple is Torah and tshuva. The second couple is Gan Eden and Gehinom. Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, is the ideal. When the ideal is realized, the whole world will be one Eden. When man was first created, at the very beginning, man was created in an ideal state. This means that mankind has an ideal root on which it grows, that each individual has this potential for the ideal life, for ideal living. However, if a man transgresses the Torah and does not rectify, does not improve, does not fix what has been broken by tshuva, by repentance, then what is created, what is formed in the world is not the Garden of Eden, but rather Gehinom, which literally means hell. When a man, as an individual, sins, he creates for himself his own punishment. When mankind as a whole is not moral, does not base society, does not base culture on moral principles, the result is hell, the punishment itself. So this is the second couple. The third couple is God's throne of glory and the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. We have here two spheres of existence. God's throne of glory. When we talk about God sitting on a throne of glory, we do not mean that God physically sits. That would be a ridiculous idea. When we talk about God sitting on the throne of glory, the throne is a symbolic throne, a metaphysical throne, a spiritual throne, a throne which is found in a much higher sphere, in a transcendental sphere, a transcendental existence. When a physical king, when a human king sits on a throne, this is symbolic of his ability to rule, to govern, to form his nation, to move his nation, to guide his nation. When we talk about God sitting on his throne, we're talking about God's governing the world, governing human history. God's governance of human history is behind the scenes. It is hidden. God is revealed in this world. God's governance, God's kingdom is revealed in this world. God's presence, the divine presence, is revealed in this world in the Holy Temple, in the Beit HaMikdash. So the throne of God, the throne of glory is in heaven. Heaven, again, not being the physical heaven, not where we look up at night and see the stars and the moon, but rather the heaven is the metaphysical heaven, the spiritual source of all that is. This spiritual source is manifest, is revealed, is expressed in the temple. God's presence is found when the temple is built. The throne of glory is above, and in the temple, the throne of glory is revealed. So we have in these three couples are the ideal and the ability to rectify any fault, any mistake that is made in an attempt to realize the ideal. We have the reward, the result, or the punishment, the result, and we have God's glory above and below. And all of these three couples lead to the Mashiach. Now, the Mashiach is the realization, the completion of human history, the goal of human history. Human history is not just a string of coincidences, an accidental string of coincidences which have no meaning or no rhyme or no rhythm. Human history has a beginning and has a goal and has a guide. The goal of human history is the Mashiach, the Messianic period in which all of mankind will live in harmony and in godliness. The force that guides and governs the messenger of God in this world, which allows us to continue and to improve, even though we have our weaknesses and even though we fall, this force is tshuva. We will see in the book, when we start reading, that Rav Kook relates to tshuva as this spiritual force of rectification. The second introduction that is necessary for us to understand the book is what is repentance, or what is tshuva, what is return. A synonym for the word return is, surprisingly enough, improvement. Return, tshuva, is not just a religious concept. Tshuva encompasses all of human life. And wherever we find improvement, we have a form of tshuva. Even if it is very physical improvement, any betterment of conditions, be they physical, be they moral, be they spiritual, any improvement is a form of tshuva. And this progress, this improvement, is moved by the spiritual force called tshuva. To understand more fully this concept of improvement and this being a essential force in creation, I want to examine briefly the story of creation as it is presented in the first chapter of the Torah. We have, in the first chapter of the Torah, we have a description of 7 days of creation. 6 days of actual doing, God does, and on the 7th day, God rests, and this is Shabbat, the Sabbath. The 6 days of doing, it is not human doing. We are talking about a movement from that which does not exist to existence, from eternity, from nothingness to existence. In every stage of this movement, we find, if we look closely, if we examine closely what is happening, we find that there is a gap between the godly ideal and the realization. For example, on the first day, God created the light. Vayomer Elohim yehi or, vayehi or. God said, let there be light, and there was light. But then we are taught by Chazal, God examined this light and saw that this light was not fitting for this world. I will explain. God examined this light and this world. This light that God created on the first day is not the physical light that we're talking about, but rather a spiritual light. When we talk about knowledge, we talk about enlightenment, which comes from the word light. When a person becomes enlightened, it is not just that he knows more, he becomes a better person. We are talking about a godly light which infuses, which permeates, which emits from goodness. When God examined this light that he created, which is the goal of the world, to be filled with this light. When God examined this light and examined the physical world which he had just created, the world that we know, this world that we live in, God saw that there was, that this world was not yet fitting to incorporate the light, to hold the light, to be a vessel, to be lit up by this divine, by this spiritual light. In essence, what we are saying, what Chazal is teaching us, is that God saw that the physical world, because of its lackings, because of its smallness, because of its temporality, could not hold the spiritual light. And therefore, God then took this spiritual light and hid it for the future. Where did he hide it? It is hidden deep inside of physical existence. The second day, on the second day, God created the heavens, the firmament. And the description given in the Torah is that God created the firmament to divide between the water above and the water below. And I want to remind you what I said before. We are not talking about the physical sky that we look up and see during the day or at night. We are talking about a spiritual entity. God created, there is water above and water below. The water below is the water that we know, the physical water. The water above is the spiritual root of the water below. So God created the firmament and separated the water above from the water below. And then Chazal come and teach us that the water below is called Mei Bechut, the crying water. The water below, the physical water, cries. You know, sometimes you can go on a hike in a lonely and a quiet place by a stream, and if you listen closely, you can hear the stream, and you could hear the stream crying. Why is the water below crying? because the water below wants to be with the water above, wants to be with the spiritual root. The spiritual root is filled with goodness, is the ideal. The water below is the real, is the practical. And there is a tremendous gap between the real and the ideal. So much so, the real is small, the real is faulty, the real is problematic. So much so that the water below cries, and this is the essence of physical nature. Deep, deep inside physical nature, there is a longing for the spiritual world of godly perfection and godly goodness, godly purity. On the third day, God created the vegetable world, plants and trees. And there's a very interesting point in the creation of the trees. When God created the trees, the commandment he gave was that the world should bring forth fruit trees that give fruit. When the world grows the trees, the description is that the world grows trees that give fruit. Not fruit trees that give fruit, but trees that give fruit. What is the difference? In the commandment, the tree itself was supposed to have the taste of the fruit. Again, we're not talking about the physical tree, but the spiritual root, the metaphysical concept. Trees and fruits are symbols, are a metaphor for means and ends. In the ideal existence, the means are always filled and permeated with all of the goodness that is found in the ends. But in the real world, there is a gap between the real and the ideal. And again, we find that the creation was less than the godly ideal. And on every day, the fourth day, the fifth day, and the sixth day, there are gaps. What can we learn from the fact that there are gaps in creation? That there is an ideal and that there is the real. The ideal is the root of the real, but there is a difference. The real is riddled with problems, riddled with weakness, riddled with smallness. It is the goal, the reason that man was created. Man was created in order to slowly but surely rectify, improve this world, raise up this world, bring this world to an ascent to its ideal godly potential. This is tshuva. The world at first was created tohu vavohu, confusion and void. And slowly, during the first 6 days, God gave the world physical form. Man continues this process of creation, both in the physical world, by taking that which already exists and improving the form, by giving new form, by creating, by inventing new inventions, which makes man's life more simple or easier or more fulfilling or deeper. Man also continues giving form to the spiritual void of the world. This process by which mankind slowly evolves, slowly develops, by which the culture of man evolves and develops to higher forms of culture, this improvement is forms of tshuva. And the force which moves this tshuva, there is a spiritual force which man can tap onto, and this spiritual force is called tshuva. This is the introduction that we will give to understand how Rav Kook relates to the concept of tshuva in the book Orot HaTshuva, The Lights of Repentance.